Worcester office for hosting us. I think we haven't been here since we had a retreat in the parking lot in August of 2021. So it's lovely to be back and to be inside. So thank you for hosting. We have Carolyn Kane on the phone, just so other board members are clear. And just really nice to see you all. I'm going to hold on the on my own comments in light of our agenda item to reflect on last week's retreat. But we have a great agenda today that follows really nicely on the retreat and on our spring conversations about the subsidy regs and other pieces. So with that, the Secretary is going to join us soon, but not immediately. So I will turn now to the Commissioner.
Great, thank you so much, Chair, and thank you all for being here. And I want to also extend my gratitude to the Worcester team. Some technical difficulties all around. So for those of you at home, there may be some buffering, but the live stream will be posted after the live recording will be posted after the board meeting, so you'll be able to see it if the audio is having trouble during the meeting. And particularly I want to thank Maricel Rosado-Lido, who is our regional director for this part of the state, and your whole team for hosting us today. So thank you. A couple quick updates since our last meeting. Most of you are aware the governor signed the budget on July 28th, which includes significant new resources for the agency. So we are now nearly a $1.2 billion agency, which is a 28% increase over fiscal 22. Includes investments in our core services and programs to support communities, educators, and programs, as well as new investments across several of our grant programs and in our reform work, both capacity with the agency, to take a hard look at reimagining our child care financial assistance or subsidy system and continue our workforce development work. So we're grateful for those resources. Since that time, the governor has also filed a supplemental budget, which includes very important new resources. So as you know, the budget for fiscal 23 includes a half a year of funding up through December for our Commonwealth Cares for Children C3 grant. And the supplemental budget includes an additional $150 million to continue that program through the full fiscal year. It also includes for the first time funding for our early education and care sector for school safety initiatives, for emergency preparedness and planning, and a number of other important innovative funds to address some of the urgent and pressing needs in the early education and care field. So we await and hope positive action on that supplemental budget. I also wanted to give you a quick update on our background record check process. As you know, we have been in a major project to reform, modernize, and streamline the background record check process, driven in large part by a federal compliance deadline, which is coming right up on September 30th, to add the National Sex Offender Registry and out-of-state checks to that background record check system. And I'm very pleased to say, I think we are on track to hit that milestone, which will keep us in compliance with our federal oversight agency, but is really just part of an overall process to modernize, update, and streamline the background record check process and to make it easier for our programs as they are struggling to hire staff. Part of the goal of that project is to try and shorten the length of time from when you all, as programs, identify folks to hire, and then the time that it takes for them to get into the classroom. So the team, I want to recognize the background record check team themselves as well as the project team. When I sent it to you in an update, I said it was a minor change, and we hope that's exactly how it feels for our programs on the outside, but it has not been a minor piece of work. So I want to recognize the team. I'm really proud that we've been able to hopefully be in compliance as we go. The last update is just we continue to work with our Department of Public Health and our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on COVID-related guidance and resources. We issued, in collaboration with DPH and DESE, updated guidance for back to school. And this guidance continues to try and balance and mitigate the spread of COVID-19 while also prioritizing keeping kids and teachers in classrooms as much as possible and minimizing the disruption to their education. So most importantly, we wanted to make sure that there's alignment across our education settings for the families that have kids in those settings. And really important that area to follow similar guidance. The last thing I just want wanted to mention is upcoming board meetings. We will continue to alternate between Boston and our field offices. So we will plan to have our October meeting back in Boston in our central office, and then we're looking to be in Springfield for our November meeting, and then back in Boston in December. So we'll look forward to seeing our partners and our staff in the offices at that time.
Okay, super, thank you. And just for those of you in the room, in case you're getting messages, they're working on the live stream, but it's not currently accessible to folks yet. But I think we can proceed into the book. Okay. Great. The secretary, let's move now to public comment. We have Leslie Baker joining us from Family Services of Central Mass, Seven Hills, who's going to talk a little about Project Flourish Apprenticeship. Thank you and welcome, Leslie.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am the program director for the Center of Child Care Careers at Family Services here in Central Mass, an affiliate of Seven Hills. I began my work with Project Flourish as a workforce development coordinator, so that's the lens from which I'll be speaking to you this afternoon. I have worked for 20 years in the field of adult basic education with marginalized people that were pursuing their high school equivalency and English speakers of other languages who were trying to improve both their speaking, listening, and literacy skills. So it was exciting for me to see this bridge into this particular field because I know there are a lot of people out there fully capable and interested in working. So this was a unique opportunity to provide that bridge. Excuse me, it's known that 50% of our workforce here in Massachusetts is not formally degreed. So we have our apprenticeship program, which can help people bridge from being non-degreed or high school completers into higher ed. We help them to establish a solid foundation in child development and help them to earn a workforce and international credential of the CDA as part of our program. And we see this as an initial step into the career ladder, so career ladder. Historically, interestingly enough, a pilot project like this was funded by OCCS back in the early 2000s. And although it was successful, it wasn't adopted at the time. Workforce wasn't as critical in need as we feel now. But when stakeholders in our area here in Worcester started to look for opportunities to address the dwindling pipeline prior to COVID, this was one of the models that was looked at very closely. As circumstances happened, the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development offered a grant for non-traditional apprenticeship. The federal government and state government were looking to expand into fields that had not traditionally experienced apprenticeship, that were primarily staffed by women, and that also had a lot of workers that were keeping them out. Child care, as you probably all well know, checks all three of those criteria. So we, along with Edward Street, which is a local organization, and 5 employer partners collaborated together and applied for this grant with the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development. Thankfully, we were awarded the opportunity in February of 2020, and then COVID hit in March. So the actual implementation was delayed for about a year until we could get some opportunities up and running. There was no way to predict the longevity and the depth of the impact of the pandemic, as we well know, and we're all trying to work beyond that and come out of that. So in response to the pandemic, our model was adopted a little bit. We changed from a face-to-face model with substitutes in the classroom so that teachers could participate to a virtual model. So we do 150 hours of related technical instruction virtually via Zoom. If our participants do not have technology available, we supply computers to them and provide support so that they're comfortable interacting in class in that model. In addition, they need to participate in 2,000 hours of supervised on-the-job training to implement the competencies that they're learning in the instruction. And this is done through the support of a mentor or a coach in their workplace. So it's someone that the director deems qualified to guide them in the implementation then we work directly with the mentors in addition to working with the apprentices. The mentor, through this process, documents the success or the abilities of the apprentice to implement what they're learning in class, and also provides supports that are specific to their program or their agency to help develop any area that may be needing additional support. At the end of the program, the apprentices are qualified for applying for the CDA, for applying for, once they achieve the CDA, for applying for licensure as a teacher under EEC. They receive a certificate from the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development, documenting their transferability of skills and what they've learned through the project. And they are also eligible to earn 6 to 9 credits at our local community colleges upon portfolio review. All of this is free of cost to our apprentices and participants, which is critical because they're earning such a low wage. We hear that having the resources to participate in college is difficult for many people. And although they're appreciative of the EEC scholarship that is available, oftentimes people don't know how to navigate the system to get connected to that. So we see our program as a starting or stepping off point and a bridge to the opportunities that have been afforded by EEC and other resources. We connect our apprentices with the local community colleges, with the EEC scholarship, and with any other supports that we're aware of. And if someone approaches us and says they're interested in working in the field, we're able to connect them with employer partners too that are willing to support them in laying this foundation. To this point, our first group cohort has finished, and they are in the process of finalizing their assessments through the CDA process. Our second cohort will be completing their instruction early next month, and will then start their application process for the CDA. Our third cohort began instruction in June. The program takes about a year because of the 2,000 hours of on-the-job training. So it is not an immediate fix, but what we're hearing clearly from the directors and the participants is that this gives them the opportunity to truly internalize and operationalize their learning in the workplace. Our fourth cohort of group educators will be starting in early October, and we also have funding through EOLWT for a fifth cohort that we hope to start in late January, early February 2023. Because people believe in apprenticeship, here in Central Mass, we had an opportunity through the United Way of Central Mass to fund a family child care cohort. That doesn't qualify currently under the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development because family educators are considered self-employed. So we needed to find a different funding resource, United Way was willing to do so, and we targeted early license within 3 years, Spanish-speaking family child care educators. Because as we did a field survey in the area, we learned from the educators here they wanted the opportunity to learn in their native language. And being able to instruct and provide materials in their native language takes away all of the translation anxiety, and people can truly focus on the content and the competency. So we support the mentors and coaches and monthly PLCs. We think that is a great support to the model. Our group child care mentors are learning under a practice-based coaching model. Our family child care coaches are working through the SEIU provided family child care training, coaches training that they're using in Connecticut and Rhode Island currently. So we've done a lot of legwork, a lot of research. We're trying to maximize the resources that are available in our community to provide a holistic approach at many levels to support these educators in their success. We, in our content, refer to the NAEYC standards, the Mass guidelines, the Massachusetts EEC regulations, and all of the tools that educators should be using in their day-to-day work as well. So we just wanted to give you a brief snapshot. We know that the Workforce Council last week spoke about apprenticeship. We're excited about the opportunity. We'd love to continue the conversation and let you learn from what we have so far and provide any support that we can. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your coming and the chance to hear in more detail about the program, which I have heard about before, so thanks. Thanks again. Great, so we're going to turn now to our June minutes. I just want to make sure that we approve the June minutes. Our meeting was in Taunton on June 21st. The minutes were part of the package, and a number of us can vote on those now. So I'd like to make the motion that we approve the minutes from the June 21, 2022 board meeting. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Paul. So Paul Belcedo,
Yes.
Jamila Lee,
Yes.
Maura Siegel,
Yes.
Carolyn Kane, Carolyn, you good on the minutes from June?
Sorry, that wasn't muted. Yes.
Thank you. All right, approved. Thank you very much. We'll turn now to just spending a few minutes reflecting on last week's retreat. Thank you all for the time and the energy, and thanks to the team in Boston for hosting. The day was really, in many ways, sort of macro, kind of set up maybe in hindsight, maybe foresight too, but the way the conversations played out, in many ways, I think struck me that, it sort of put to the fore. So we had 4 sessions, just for some of you who are joining. We started by hearing a little more about how the agency is organized today, and we've had a few new staff members. We moved into a session on the workforce, and then on subsidy, and then a little bit on C3 to tee up more for today. Big picture, it brings to the fore this inflection point for the agency at this moment, sort of more well over a decade into the work as an agency, plus pandemic with new resources where there's lots of discussion and opportunity both to innovate and to address major issues that were not just specific to childcare, but childcare's connection to society and the economy. And I think in many ways it sort of accelerated this conversation about what is the state strategy for the 21st century childcare system, and how do we think about the economic development piece, the supporting working families piece, and the boost for vulnerable populations, right? Kind of, in some ways, 3 levers that all have to work together. But ultimately demand some vision and some strategy for how an agency does that work over the next decade, all over the country. Because families' lives are going to continue to change. Vulnerability indices are not going to get much better in the next few years anyway. And the way people work has changed, and states are more and more on the hook to think about how we cultivate a strong workforce writ large, plus agencies are on the hook to think about staffing shortages and how we cultivate a workforce easy. So I have just been thinking about our 3 agenda items, the workforce, the subsidy, and the C3, as actually all sort of manifestations, instantiations of these larger issues facing state agencies and states to think about what is the state strategy for childcare infrastructure, plus the pulling the lever to support working families and give vulnerable children a boost. So with that, I thought there were 2 other sort of within that frame, there's sort of two points. One, we see again today in the market rate data, which is how do we think about regionality? It's not going to be a one-shot deal with any strategy, and how do we think about differentiated approaches and stratification based on A, region, but B, region plus mixed delivery, which is, a way to think about not just the demographics in the region, but also what's the childcare infrastructure and which lever to pull depending on what's there already and who the workforce is, as we just, for example, heard about here in Central Mass. So that was sort of my thoughts, big picture, and a couple of these more micro issues in thinking about strategy and vision going forward. You may, Commissioner, have other things, and others may want to jump in too.
Yeah, I'm eager to hear reflections from the board members, and we've had a chance with the team to debrief a little bit. I think just grateful for the opportunity to engage and partner on sort of the big questions about where the agency needs to go. And I think in the 6 months I've been acting commissioner, I've had the opportunity to visit and hear from families and programs and the urgent issues facing the agency now, but really how we organize ourselves to be the early education and care leadership going forward. And I think one of the big takeaways, of course, from that meeting and even working with our Workforce Council and Advisory Council is that alone, we are not going to be able to do this work alone. But I think the thing I'm really grateful for about the retreat was the opportunity to reflect on sort of how do we organize ourselves going forward to take advantage of the opportunities and the challenges urgently in the current field, and what do we need to do operationally to begin to connect up to that vision and strategy. So I felt like we had the opportunity to talk about the role of the agency, the role of the board, where the field needs to go, and how we make a contribution to that. And then we got to talk into some more detail about how we're going to turn that from vision and strategy into action and operation. So building specific capacity of the agency to take on family access and economic mobility issues, building capacity on the agency to support our family child care providers, building capacity to make sure we're supporting the workforce based on the challenges they're facing today. And then the opportunity to think about a modern child care financial assistance system that meets the challenges that families are having now, so that we can contribute to the economic recovery coming out of the pandemic in a really meaningful way for our families. So that interplay between sort of the big questions of the day and where we're heading as a sector, and then to connect it back to sort of how do we operationalize it at the agency. And I'm so happy to hear about the Flourish program, which I've been hearing about since we got here, and really thinking about some of the key strategies that we can pursue to support workforce recruitment and retention, which is absolutely the challenge of the day. There will not be a meeting, I don't think, in the next year where we're not going to be talking about that, but where I hope we'll be able to make progress on things like apprenticeship programs, on supporting our family child care providers as an economic development strategy, and really promoting the field in a positive growth way. Attracting people into the field and supporting our early education and care providers to have a more centralized, easy way to do hiring and recruitment. So we have a lot of challenges, and every day, we hear from the programs and providers, and you'll hear from some of them today about what's happening on the ground. But coming out of the retreat, I felt very hopeful that there are some very critical and impactful levers that we as a board and as an agency can press on.
Other thoughts, comments on the retreat last week?
I'll just amplify some of the comments you all made, because I do think there's an opportunity right here, and I'm really excited to hear from the panel today, because I do think it complements the discussion that we had last week so nicely, and is so critical to how we create that vision and that action plan going forward. I'm big on regionalization, right? So that we can understand that the Commonwealth is large, and there are different priorities and different needs in different gateway cities across the Commonwealth. And so one of the takeaways for me was one of the many benefits, I think, of C3 is we've got a lot of data, right? And so how do we take that data to inform the decisions going forward that we have, and challenge ourselves to think differently on how we use that data by region? And so a takeaway for me was that, and a takeaway for me was really hope. I mean, I really do. I think if I have any message to anybody engaged that gets up every single day engaged in this work, is now is the time to speak up, because there's an opportunity here with resources and the efficiencies that the team is making on the day-to-day struggles that many in the field face, and we're going. And that spirit was at the table last week, and one that I think we want to carry going forward to the field. Again, excited to hear from the folks today that are here to participate on ways that we can work collaboratively to do that. Because this isn't an opportunity that we can miss. We'll probably get some things right and some things wrong, but I think there is a spirit of agility and flexibility right now to learn from those opportunities, so that we really are, at the end of the day, providing quality care for children, supporting their family and guardians, and also inviting people into this field, which is something that we also need to work on the messaging about of why this field is so important. And yes, we need to address compensation and benefits, but there's more to it. And I think a lot of that messaging and theme was carried through last week as well. So I like to be an optimistic person. There are certainly lots of deficits, but I believe there are way more opportunities in front of us. And I think the catalyst for lots of these conversations was last week and carried through to today, and so it's up to us to keep it going. So just kudos to, I sent a note to the commissioner, kudos to the team, her team that put together lots of really helpful information to help guide that conversation, and we're moving, and that's really exciting. So.
Agreed. I'll continue on the line of opportunity and that timing. I think there's a lot more awareness of our field with COVID, but also, and I'll have to plug this in because I was part of that commission that developed a report that I think we should definitely consider as we're making these changes, because it has, I think, at least my perception is that it has very strong legislative support, and it included stakeholders across the state. So I think the timing is right, again, because of the awareness that exists, but also the fact that there is information out there that we can start aligning with the goals of the agency and the fabulous team that you're building too. So.
Great. Yes. There's some distributed leadership opportunities too, to the commissioner's point, which is a piece of this moment. Anyone else on reflections from the retreat? Hello, Secretary.
Hello, sorry.
Not at all.
I just want to share Amy used a metaphor that I really enjoyed, which is that when the pandemic hit, we had to sort of use a sledgehammer to knock everything down, but we're going to come back with a scalpel. And that was something that really stuck with me, and I think just speaks to the tremendous opportunity that we have to think really differently about how the system works, and because we're no longer wedded to, well, this is the way that it's always been, and so it has to be this way, and how could we even possibly think of doing something different? The pandemic forced us to really think differently, and now we can come back post-pandemic and say, what's the way that we really want to build it in an intentional and smart way to work with the 21st century and how families and providers need it to work. So very excited about and very hopeful about where we are now and the potential moving forward as well.
Great. Anyone else on the retreat? Okay, excellent. Well, I certainly did think that it framed up today's meeting particularly well, and like Paul, I'm thrilled that we're going to hear in even more intentional and deliberate ways from the field this afternoon, a fabulous panel. We're going to start now into our next agenda item. Invite Janice DiLoretto-Smith up to talk to us about a request for review on the continuation of subsidized care services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again, Commissioner and Mr. Secretary, members of the board. It's great to see all of you again and to hear some of those wonderful reflections from the retreat last week. As you may recall, in June, the board approved draft regulations concerning the appeals process for those families whose subsidized care is denied at reauthorization or is terminated. As we discussed then, EEC has recognized that the appeals process can cause significant disruption to families, not just to the stability of their child care, but also to economic recovery and the ability for working parents to stay in the workforce. We know that we need to be better at making sure that that stability is there and to make these processes as efficient as possible. So what we tried to do, and what we presented in June, was a set of draft regulations that make some more, that increase the availability of continued care during that process so that folks don't have that disruption in their lives, and for their children. And following the board, we also did things like to make it more human-centered. Some simple things like allowing these hearings to happen virtually as opposed to requiring our families to come in person to have their matters heard before adjudicative staff members here at the agency. So
Unless they choose to.
unless they choose to do so, and that's really it, Commissioner. It's giving folks that choice so that we're able to be as responsive to the needs of families as we can while being efficient. And so following the board's approval to put these regulations out for public comment, we did just that. We also made required notices to various legislative bodies, including municipal bodies as well. Despite all of that, we did not actually receive any public comment. So I'd like to think that that's because there's no concern about these, and that they are responsive to the needs of our communities and the constituencies we serve. So with that, we have not made any changes to the regulations that this board approved back in June. And at this point, we are asking the board to formally approve that same regulations. They were included in your packet, so that we can promulgate them and put into practice what we've put before you today for our families. If there are no questions, I know we have a very packed agenda today, so I'd love to have folks give you more of their time, but we are asking the board to approve those regulations, so we can get to work.
Questions, comments? I'll take the time for this lengthy motion. Let me make the motion that the Board of Early Education and Care, in accordance with General Law, Chapter 15D, Section 3F, having solicited public comment as required by General Law, Chapter 30A, and having received none, hereby approves 606 CMR 10.00 and 10.11, the proposed amended regulations governing financial assistance for subsidized care, that the board also authorizes the Commissioner of Early Education and Care to file the proposed amended regulations with the Secretary of the Commonwealth for publication in the Massachusetts Register as 606 CMR 10 and 11 in accordance with General Law, Chapter 30A. Could I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Nikki. All right, I'm going to call the vote then. Secretary Heiser?
Yes.
Maria Moeller?
Yes.
Jamila Lee?
Yes.
Nikki Ruiz de Luzuriaga? Maura Siegel? Paul Belcido?
Yes.
Carolyn Kane?
Yes.
Thank you. Approved.
Thank you very much.
Janice, very much for your work.
Thank you very much.
And for the ongoing commitment to this kind of improvement. We are going to take a short break, let's say about 5 to 7 minutes, for a technology changeover. We will then turn to this market rate survey presentation and this preliminary cost, right? So now we're kind of into this mixed methodology as required by the federal regs. So let's take a short break, say 5 minutes would be good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to turn now to this 2022 market rate survey and preliminary cost analysis. I want to certainly thank external partners. Welcome to the table, and thanks to Adrian and Amy too for the internal partnership on this work, which sits within federal regulations and practice, and certainly very comprehensive, and I really appreciate the level of detail and the clarity of the presentation. So we'll turn it over, unless the Commissioner wants to say a few things.
Sure, and I'm happy to turn it over to the team, but I also want to extend my gratitude to our research partners. As you will hear, we have a brand new methodology we were able to use this year, which I think is going to help us feel a level of confidence in our ability to use this data to really think through not just rates and the subsidy system, but really the strategic financing future around early education and care. So really important information to share about how we think about our rate structure, how we think about access for families, but also how we think about the financing of programs in general and what role we may have. So looking forward to the market rate survey, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the Commonwealth Cares for Children, and then have an opportunity to hear from 4 programs operating across the state. We'll have reflections on those sort of findings from the study, both the preliminary cost study as well as the market rate survey, and thinking a little bit about the C3 program too, and how that looks back to the retreat conversations and looks forward to our strategy going forward. So turn it over to Amy Checkowitz, and have you introduce yourselves and our research team.
Hi, Amy Checkowitz, Senior Associate Commissioner for Policy Research and Data Analytics. It's great to be here, and I actually have the pleasure of introducing our external partners, but I'll let Adrienne introduce yourself as well before we begin.
Thanks, Adrienne Murphy, the Director of Data Analytics here at UC.
So I think before I do the introduction, just want to reiterate and reinforce that the information and findings that will be shared today really do feel very timely and important and informative, and so looking forward to the discussion. EEC contracted with the Center for Early Learning Funding Equity, which is within Northern Illinois University, this past spring to carry out the 2022 market rate survey as well as the preliminary cost analysis, and they will be sharing those findings today. I want to thank them very deeply for their tireless work, which has been very intensive, and I think just want to highlight that not only have they provided research and analysis, but also a really helpful strategic sort of partnership and thinking, and look forward to some of the work ahead, which we'll also be giving you a heads up about. So today we are joined by 2 members of the team. Sitting next to me, I'll start here, is Ceci Nyman, who is Senior Policy Advisor and Project Manager. She is a seasoned nonprofit executive with over 25 years of experience in government and organizational leadership. She's worked in the fields of early care and education, maternal and child health, community and stakeholder engagement, and early childhood policy. And to her left, Dr. Teresa Hawley, who's the Executive Director of the Center. She is an expert in the design of early childhood programs and systems that support the school readiness and social competence of young children in poverty. In her previous role as Director of Early Childhood Transformation in partnership with the Illinois Governor's Office, she directed the design of changes to the state's funding mechanisms and governance structure for early childhood education. Dr. Hawley has over 30 years of experience in government and nonprofit leadership. And again, it's clear they offer a multitude of really helpful perspectives as we think about the system as a whole. So I'll turn it to you, Teresa, to dive into the presentation.
All right, well, we're going to go on a whirlwind tour of market rates and preliminary costs, and I'm super excited to talk with you about where my passion lies, is that how we fund these systems so that they are able to serve the needs of kids and families in an equitable way. So we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. I'm going to guide you through really quickly, and just if wherever I'm going too fast or you want to dig a little bit deeper, go ahead and stop me, and we'll narrow in on what it is you do. So our team, we partnered with a group called Action Partners as well as Children's Funding Project, who have been working with us throughout this engagement, and we appreciate their support. What we're going to go through and talk about today is start off with a little bit of why we're doing any of these studies, how they fit into the federal requirements that we have, the purposes of them. And we're going to talk about kind of prices versus costs, and that's going to be our structure that we're going to talk about this data as we go through, and look at how those function in our analysis and then our objective here, which is setting rates well so that we're able to provide access to the child care market. So in the federal law that governs the Child Care Development Fund, states are required to set their subsidy rates in a way that gives families access to the child care market. So it's like, they call it equal access, or access to the majority of the market. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can think about
assessing whether you're actually getting to that equal access to the market. The first and the one that most people think about and most people talk about is the subsidy rates as being a percentile of the market. So this is really taking all of the prices that everybody charges in the market and counting up from the bottom till you get to where the subsidy rate is and saying, you know, what percent of the market are we covering here? Where would you be able to go and use your subsidy? That is, again, the one that most people talk about most of the time. The Federal Office of Child Care has set a benchmark for that as the 75th percentile, as being like, we'd like you to be charging people what it would cost to get to 75% of the slots. Okay, so the second way, and it's all right, I pretty much have the slides memorized, so at this point I'm just going to keep going. The second way that we can think about this is rates as a percentage of that, thank you, of that target rate. And it's a little bit different, but why do we care about that? Well, we care about that because if the rates that people may charge in the market may be really spread out, or they might be a tight band of what people are charging in the market. So saying the percentile of the market only gives you a little bit of information. But so, for example, if the rate that you're paying is at the 20th percentile, but that's only $1 a day lower than the 75th percentile, man, who cares, right? Like a lot of providers are still going to be willing to accept the subsidy. But if that rate is $30 a day lower than the 75th percentile, that is materially going to affect whether people are willing to accept that subsidy. So rates is a percentile, rates is a percentage of that benchmark percentile. And then the last way is the percent of providers who actually do step up and say, yes, I will accept the subsidy. So how many providers are actually accepting subsidy? Now, they may accept subsidy for all of their kids. They may say, we'll accept 5 subsidy kids. But it gives you a sense of, if most providers are unwilling to accept the subsidy, the rates are probably not where they need to be in order to provide people that kind of equal access. And historically, the federal government has focused their energy mostly on making sure that you're hitting this price state, right? The market rate, or the price that you're paying, meeting the prices that are in the market? But in the last 5 to 10 years, that's not the only thing we need to look at. We need to also look at, how are the rates in regard to the cost of providing those services? Part of the reason for this is because in some places, the market rate is setting, or the subsidy rate is setting the market rate. If you're in a part of the state where almost everybody is receiving subsidy, the subsidy rate is what people are charging everybody else. It's cyclical. And that can, over a period of 30 years, which we now have under our belt, you can get pretty far away from what it actually costs to provide those services, and really impacts the ability of providers to stay open and to provide those services. So that's why we need to look at both prices and costs. And throughout this presentation, prices are going to be blue, costs are going to be red, and it's going to help you guide through what we're talking about. But you need to look at both of those sets of information to understand and guide your overall funding policy. So for prices, that's the market rate survey. We're trying to understand how much are providers charging private pay families for care, to understand how much of the market people have access to. For costs, we're really trying to understand 2 things. One, most basically, how much does it cost to operate using meeting the licensing requirements and using the salaries that people are paying today? What's it currently costing people to operate these programs, as best as we can guess and estimate? But we also want to know, what would it cost if we were actually paying the wages we needed to pay for the field, if we were doing all of the quality factors that we need for the development of the kids, the sort of true cost of care or true cost of quality kind of analyses. Today, we're really just talking about the first 2. Future work is going to take care of this. Well, what do we need providers to be charging or being paid in order to meet these costs? We're really going to look at the prices they're charging and what does it cost basically today to provide this care. Together, those 2 pieces of information give you a really good understanding of how well the child care market is functioning. It's a mostly private pay market, and even the folks who are subsidies, they're paying, if the parents have that voucher there, they can go where they want. It's a very market-based system. And we know the market's functioning well when providers are able to charge families enough to cover their full costs. If that's how things are going, then subsidy rates, yeah, set them by the market rate study, set them by the prices that people are charging. But if providers are not able to charge parents high enough, which generally speaking, spoiler alert, they're not, then we know that setting subsidy rates just by the market rate is not going to be enough over time to really support the field. And that's the crisis that we are in now, after 30 years of just paying attention to market prices. So another thing to keep in mind is just a quiet adventure. You should keep in mind when we're looking at all this data as we go, we're going to be breaking it out by ages of children served. And it's important to keep in mind that it's incredibly more expensive to serve infants and toddlers than it is to serve preschoolers and school-age kids. Why? Because a classroom costs about what a classroom costs with a teacher and an aide and whatever other support you're going to give. And you're going to divide that by the number of children who are in that classroom. And in that case, with infants and toddlers, that's maybe 7 to 9 children. In the case of preschoolers, it's maybe 20, and school-agers, it could be even a higher number of kids that are in the group. So it's really a function of how many kids you're dividing it by. But in the real world, you cannot go to somebody who just had a baby and say, well, don't worry, a couple of years from now it'll only cost you this much, but right now I'm going to have to charge you 2.5 times that in order to care for your child. No, in fact, what you would do is you smooth out the prices that you're charging, even though the costs are all over the place. And I think maybe it's my laser pointer.
Dr. Holly, can I jump in 1 second on this slide?
Sure can.
This is the best visual I've seen to internalize that point about like you essentially making a profit in the older kid.
Yeah.
And so the increased percentage of the students in the state who are going into public pre-K, which we all know is changing the dynamics. As we're modeling out some of these decisions, will we be incorporating assumptions about increased pre-K participation and the impacts of this?
What we're going to be doing as a team is providing you the modeling engine.
Okay.
That's
So
going to allow you to
adjust assumptions.
to make adjustments to assumptions, to test out different hypotheses and see what that will look like. Okay. Things to keep in mind, historically, like most states, the rates here in the Commonwealth have not been at the 75th percentile. In fact, most of the reimbursement rates have not been showing up as even at the 50th percentile of the market rates. Previous studies used different methodologies and not completely comparable, but there's been progress here for sure towards getting closer to reimbursement rates, but they're historically. So we're going to start with the market rate study and dig in there to what we found and how we did this. So as the commissioner said, there was a new way of approaching this year, and that is to use administrative data. So in the past, this was a whole new separate study, has sent out a survey to everybody and hope that lots of people applied to it to gather the data that needed. But because of C3, because of that, we now have the lead database has prices in it that where people are charging folks in the market. There was a requirement to go in and update and say, yes, this is what I'm actually charging, so that we have that administrative data for folks in the database. We were able to just pull that and analyze that rather than going out into the field to do a separate survey.
Can I just emphasize why that is so important for us to be able to rely on this data? Because previously we would send out a survey and we would be subject to who would respond to it. And you can imagine those who would respond would generally be the providers who are participating in the system where rates are being set. And so I think there was big concerns over the years that it was not representative of the whole market. And for us to be basing policy or funding or allocation decisions on that would be complicated if it wasn't more representative. So the administrative data, pulling in a broader swath of, not everybody, but a broader swath, allows us to have a level of confidence in the data that we may not have had in previous cycles.
Even so, we ended up, there were some providers we had to pull out of the sample because the federal requirement is that it's a recent market rate study, and so we use the cutoff data if your data had changed as of a year ago, and use that data so that it isn't. We did have to eliminate some, and then there were some that were likely data entry errors that you can't get away from data entry.
So that's a federal requirement, the 1 year.
That's how we operationalized it.
Okay.
The requirement is that it be a recent market rate study, and we operationalized that as done here. Yeah.
Also, the costs have changed so much for providers over the last year.
We thought that was, especially in this year of tremendous inflation.
It's just a lot of data, right?
Sure, and I think that's one of the things we can do moving forward is to think about how we make sure, it is possible that 1/3 of providers in this whole state haven't changed their rates in more than a year, like not even by a penny, but it's more likely that they didn't update, but we had to have a cutoff.
Yeah,
So you have to have a cutoff. Okay. So this is, again, it's an adventure, it's all good, and I think that most of you have the slides in front of you.
We're making some time.
As we hoped, it did provide a more representative sample, about 55 to 60% of providers in all the different regions we were able to have in our sample, and then particularly with family child care, it really upped the numbers of the folks who were in the sample, which is great. We have a bunch of numbers on this slide. On the far right-hand side, what we have there is there's a statistical target that we have to hit in order to.
Reference the slide.
Yeah, you better reference.
Oh, I'm referencing, yeah, sorry, slide 13. Yes, slide 13. So it's slide 13 and the far right-hand side, basically you want to see those numbers all be over 100%, and you can see that they're way over 100%. So if we're at 100%, they would be considered a reasonable and representative enough sample, and they're significantly higher than that. So what do we find in doing the market rate? Again, no surprises that the subsidy rates are, in fact, currently below the 75th percentile in all of the regions. And okay, we also found, remember we were looking at rates as a percentile, rates as a percentage of that benchmark rate, and where we found that on average, the rates are about 23% lower than the benchmark rate. So that's pretty substantial. It's not just that they're at a low percentile of the market, there are a lot of dollars there that folks lose by taking somebody on subsidy if their market price for themselves is much higher than that. And then, percentage of providers that accept subsidies. So about 60% of providers in the sample do report that they accept child care subsidies. And it's getting back to what the commissioner said. We had 40% of the folks in the sample were not. So we did have lots of folks who don't participate in the subsidy system as part of this sample. So that was good. Lots and lots of data here, and I'm not going to go through each of these slides. We're looking at slides 15 through 18. That gives you a lot of detail that are the required detail of the federal report. You have to show the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile, compare that to the current subsidy rate, and then say what percentile of the market is the current subsidy, is the current rate. And you can kind of see there's variance here for some regions, some types of care, some age groups. Things are looking better than in other places. It's not a consistent all across the board that we're sitting at the same percentile of the market. Maybe it just wants to go to This is where I want to bring your attention, though, which is to slide 19. And here we have all of the different rates that we looked at for center-based providers and family child care providers, all of the different regions down along the left, and across the top there are the different age groups that we're looking at. And it's color-coded here, so the folks that, or the rates that are above at least the 50th percentile, above the mean that are charged, or median, you can see those are in green, and those that are not are in red. And you can see more of them are red than are green. And but again, this is kind of a lot to take in. Just the general idea here is that there's a lot of variation. This is not all the same number all across this grid. It's not the same number if you look across a row. It's not the same number if you look down a column. It's all kind of all over the place in terms of what percentile of the market rate we are. And again, most of them are below that target of the 75th percentile of the market rate. So we do know from the data that we have here, though, in this, that families do have access to a lot of the child care market. So 60%, as I said, do report that they accept child care subsidies, but in the data set and in the questions that were asked in surveys that were done within the C3 grant application, we asked some questions about, if you don't accept subsidy, why don't you? And there were, maybe about a quarter of the providers said that one of the reasons they don't is because the subsidy rate is low. But they also pointed to other reasons, like they are primarily serving non-subsidy families and they're full, and so they don't take it, or they feel like there's too much administrative work. So there's more that can be worked on to increase access than just rates alone. Looking backwards, and we on slide 21, that's data from the 2018 study, and you can see that back in 2018, when this market rate study was done with a little bit different methodology, the same sort of story was there, that the rates were definitely lower and they were a bit varied across all the different regions and age groups and types of care.
I think it might be also just important at this moment to point out that there has been a big commitment to increasing rates over the last several years. I can't remember the total amount, but something like 160 million has gone into rate increases, but maybe more. And at the same time, the costs are going up for programs and providers. So I think there's been an enormous investment, and we're sort of keeping pace, but not catching up beyond.
I just have some of the questions, more requests, and I'm not looking at your slides here because I don't have them, but the previous slide of that one, the one that had all of the 2018 summary,
Yeah.
or 2019, 2018. Do you have that with the percentiles so that we can compare that?
Unfortunately, we
to the other
don't.
one?
I know, that would be the
Okay.
better way to do the comparison slide, but the way that report was written, we weren't able to
Got
draw
it.
that
Okay.
data. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the cost part of this and looking at how what it cost folks to be able to run these programs. And where did we get this data from? So back in 2020, there was a survey of providers. In 2018, there was also a survey of providers built into that narrow cost analysis. So we had a couple of opportunities to survey people to get some information for them on what salaries are they paying, what their staffing structures are, what their different costs are. We're also able to use data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, so they do have data about childcare workers, preschool teachers and such that we're able to use to get some data about wages in the field. There's a lot of national data around non-personnel costs, like what do you need to budget for toys and materials, and that are able to be used to be put into these kind of model budgets. And so all of that was put together, and some model budgets and some model cost analysis were done, and then that was sort of taken on the road, except it was COVID, so it was webinars, in order to get some consensus on those model inputs that were put into that. All of that done 2 years ago, and so we had a pretty urgent timeline here to get this preliminary analysis done, and because in response to federal requirements. So we didn't go out and do new data collection here. What we did was inflate what we had in the model already. And we used some very specific inflation things. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because that's really geeky. But we had a bunch of different ways that we inflated the data as we move forward. So what did we find in the preliminary cost analysis results? Well, as we expected, the cost for providing infant and toddler care it far exceeds the cost of providing care for preschool and school-age children, really because there's fewer kids to divide it by. And in contrast, we found that the estimated cost for providing care didn't vary as much across geographies across the Commonwealth. So data were collected on the wages, both from the BLS and from what providers themselves told us, and that both those were consistent, that there was not a wide range of what the salaries were across the Commonwealth. We weren't able to directly estimate different costs for things like occupancy, rent, and the other costs of doing business. I think that's sort of for our future, looking deeper into what might be driving any real differences in costs across different communities. Okay, so what to look at in the charts here that give you the results from the narrow cost analysis. I think if you look at the slide 25 and the table here, looking across the rows that are labeled per classroom per year, and whether it's across that or down the columns, you can see there's not a huge amount of variation here, maybe a 25% different variation in the cost of running a classroom. But again, when you divide that by the kids and by days, you're getting a really large difference in the cost per child that it costs to do these programs. When you look at that and family childcare has a little bit less variation, but the variation is there because if you serve infants and toddlers, you can serve fewer children in a family childcare program.
I'm sorry, I have a quick question.
Sure.
And forgive me if this is not a good one, but I knew that that group in school age was more expensive than family childcare, but I didn't realize that the costs were this different. What is driving that? I mean, it's almost double. Like, what is driving that cost difference between family childcare and group? Is that just rent? Is that, I mean,
Part of what actually is driving it, yes, there's a lot of things that are driving it, and I think this is what we'll dig into more deeply as we do further cost studies. Honestly, part of what's driving that is how the kids are getting divided into the total costs, and the size of the program. And what do you mean by that? Well,
because the
So
ratios
it's
are
kind of
the
the
same.
business model, right? And family childcare providers are inherently smaller, and so when you
Yeah.
go back to it's a matter of division, right? You have fewer children, and so it's a smaller business. They have less overhead costs, and they don't have really the same licensing requirements.
So the overhead though would be the swing.
Yeah, I'm just trying, because there
Part
should
of
be
the
like,
swing.
there should be, things should get less expensive as you get bigger, right? I mean,
Well,
basic-
unless your administrative burden, like I started to think about staffing,
Right.
like
Yeah.
looking to staff for functions that the tireless FCC
doesn't matter.
is doing
Sure.
everything,
Right.
right?
Sure,
And
sure,
and
sure.
maybe that the administrative cost is non-linear to the number of kids you're serving. In other words, it doesn't take much to feel like you need administrative support, but it may not scale well with the number of kids you're serving, even in the center, if that makes sense. Because those are salaries, right? And so once
Right, the biggest
and
driver
once you're
cost
into
is salaries.
salaries,
Right, in a
compared
childcare
to,
center.
for the CFO or for the person,
Even if you don't have that administrative backbone, it really is the teachers that are driving the cost of the childcare program, right? And the
Right.
regulatory issues require, when you have kind of a licensed childcare center, you have 6 classrooms that are licensed, that comes with a kind of built-in math equation in terms of number of kids, number of adults in the program. And then you have kind of, if you have administrative backbone, a director, a business manager, et cetera, you have floaters, and then you have different, depending on where you are geographically, like if you're in the city of Boston, you might have security, you might have other expenses that are related, versus a family childcare home, you're kind of using your home as your program.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Seeing the, I already started.
This is a great question, I think, one for us to dig deeper in as we do the next phase of study to really understand what's driving that.
Well, and especially because the workers at a center do not make very good wages. Like
Correct,
right.
the
Correct.
wages that a family child care provider is able to bring into themselves is better than, so it's like you're,
I think that's a great research
I do.
question.
We
Part of
think.
it, I wondered,
I just
is like, is
Right.
this, is part of the cost what they're paying themselves low too? I mean, I think what.
And there's
It's a hard question to
It's
answer.
really hard. Modeling the cost of family childcare is exceptionally difficult, and I think it's something that and we're on a mission to build a field of cost modeling for early childhood because we think that there's not a lot of consistency and standards to it across the board. If you think that's true of centers, holy cow, for family childcare, we don't have a great model of
The
this.
difference is really in infants and toddlers, it's not in
That's correct.
older
Yeah.
kids. So there may be something more particular there
Yeah.
about what's going on, as
I
opposed to the
think
general
if you
operating
take
model.
infants and toddlers, you may still believe that maybe it's a different group in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just makes you think like,
overall number of kids.
Yeah, is the cost fully understood and represented here for the family child care? Or, yeah, it's just like,
A lot of invisible, I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
a lot of work. This was in a blog post actually that I circulated to the board that I think you were involved in and your partner who's on the
Yes.
other slide, but like, you know, as soon as you're at a center, you're talking about business hours and you can you know, everything's much more clearly concrete and
Right.
contained in terms of the capture,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
That's what you're getting at. I agree. And I think that is going to be an issue going forward for all this cost modeling work, is to figure out how to capture a lot of the work that goes on for the FCC.
And how to support an FCC marketplace is really challenging, because in contrast to in a childcare center, somebody makes a salary, and yes, the overall business may rise or fall or be threatened, but that teacher, it still gets paid, whether the kids are there or not, right? The family childcare provider, in fact, doesn't. And so if you're trying to hit a certain target of salary, they only make as much as the number of kids that they're serving. So
At that moment, in fact.
right, 'cause they're an independent business.
It's very dynamic.
Yes, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
We will have a family child care provider on who might be able to offer some, and Maria, I know you run a family child care system as well. So.
I wonder if the fact that again, family child care program, have more than 2 infants, whereas you can have 9 and 2 staff members. So I don't know what the formula.
Right, and I think
Right.
that we didn't as heavily weight the costs onto the infants and toddlers in recognition of that. Like, again, getting a cost for what a family child care home costs to run is hard enough. Then dividing that out to say what that is per child per day there's not a lot of rationale to you make a choice yeah. Great questions. All right, so the fun really comes in putting all of this together into looking at all of the rates together across the narrow cost or the preliminary cost analysis, the 75th percentile of the market rate, and the current rate that's being paid. So if you look at slides 29 and 30, these charts have all of these numbers aligned here, the current rate, the 75th percentile market rate, and the cost estimate. Again, that's pretty hard to take in, so let's look at it more visually, and I think some things will pop out at you. On page 31, you can look at, we've put together here for 2 different markets, 2 different regions of the state, of the Commonwealth, the price data and the cost data and the subsidy rate. And you can look at how they align quite differently in Western Massachusetts than they do in the Metro Boston area. So in Western Massachusetts, you can see that it's fairly across the board here. The subsidy rate and the 75th percentile of the market rate are not that far off. We may not still be hitting a terribly high percentile, but they're close to one another. They're in the same ballpark. The cost, on the other hand, is in another league, right? That what folks are able to charge in that community is nowhere near what it's costing them to run the program. And importantly, you look at the preschool and school age rate, and that's basically still true. They're still not able to charge what it's costing in our estimating model for them to operate that program. In contrast, you look at Metro Boston, which is a much more functioning market for childcare, where people, remember that what I said, how do you know a market is functioning well? You know it's functioning well if people can charge as much as it costs to provide the services. Well, clearly in Metro Boston, at least at the high end, folks are able to charge that at the very high end. I will say, however, that if you dig into Metro Boston, that's not the full story. Yes, at the high end, the market is able to charge what it costs to do these services, but not all providers are able to charge at that level. So on slide 32, what we've done here is to try to put all of these things together visually in one chart. I wish I had my little laser pointer to be able to show you this on the wall, because it would help you. But what you want to do in looking at this chart is the bars are showing you kind of the range of the market prices that are being charged. The bottom of it being the 25th percentile, then the median, the 50th percentile, and the 75th percentile. So that's where most of the folks are charging their prices. You can see those bars are pretty big. It's a pretty big range of what people are charging. The little red triangles are what we estimated actually cost to provide those services. So one of the things you can see in the Metro Boston is that some people are really able to charge more than it costs even for infants or toddlers. They are probably doing more things in their program. Maybe they're paying higher prices. Maybe they're paying much higher prices for rent than we have been able to estimate into our models. In all cases, you can see the little black dot is what the subsidy rate is, and you can see how kind of out of step it is with the market that's being charged, even the widespread of the market of rates that are there. Questions on reading this little snippet of the chart, because then we're going to jump into trying to look at the whole Commonwealth at the same time. All right. Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand the cost estimation methodology. In particular, are you using actual, sounds like the wrong word, but estimated actual wages?
Yes.
So if you was, and it's based on meeting EEC licensing standards as opposed to some higher quality standard. So this data would suggest that these programs are not meeting EEC licensing standards somehow, because they're spending,
in Western Mass.
Yeah, like 35% below, or even more, 40% below what it costs to meet standards. Now, obviously, that's it's an estimate, it's plus or minus whatever, but
what does that say? What are we worried about?
What are we supposed to learn from that?
Well,
one question is whether, in fact, there's always reason for us to be concerned about whether programs meet licensing requirements.
Yes.
One would have to assume that they are meeting the sort of basic ratio requirements as opposed to they're playing around with that number. But could it mean that salaries, assuming that's the biggest part of it, are lower than what we actually think is being paid in the market?
It could be that. We're also using average data for wages, somewhat broken out by
child care professionals or staff.
Correct, for child care professionals. I will tell you that at least one of the metrics that we have in there for aides is set at the legal minimum wage. And there's a little bit of time lag in some of these costs where we inflated the cost to April of 2020. Maybe some people's prices are back from, or 2022, they're back from 21. So there's some reasons why that might vary. The other thing is that when we do the cost estimate, we staff it out the way that people say this is how you should staff if you're going to meet licensing requirements without losing your mind. And that means full-time people and maybe floaters that are full-time that are make sure that you're always meeting ratio and all that. What we know actually happens in child care centers is that as soon as there's few enough kids, we combine groups and we send people home. They're doing that because the financing of child care makes that necessary in order to run the program.
Got it. So there is some assumption built in, not necessarily best practice, but good practice, let's say, that may or may not be actually met, even though they're still within licensing standards.
Right, so it's legal practice.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Could this also be a product of a larger number of large agencies in those regions where they can be more cost effective?
That is possible. Yeah, and I will say that all of our cost estimates here are built on a model center that has one classroom group per age and two of the preschool or whatever, so that folks do different combinations to get where they can work. People also, nationally, you can see that people use many other sources of revenue than just childcare subsidies or parent fees. So they may be, raising money because they're not for profit, and they're bringing United Way money, or they have Head Start money, or there's lots of other possibilities of how they're filling that budget gap.
And a focus of the next stage of work is, again, there will be both an engine that will allow for changing assumptions, but also a deeper look at different kinds of program sort of profiles in terms of some of these things that really could affect costs very much in terms of such as size.
All right, hopefully you guys all have in color, because it's all about the color, and I haven't been black and white, but that's okay. No, it's okay. I don't, you need the color. So what we have on slides 33, 34, 35, 33 is showing you this, again, across the whole Commonwealth for group and school age providers. What do you want to take away from this spread here? Well, you want to see that in some regions of the state, like Region 1, Region 5, to a lesser extent Region 2, the range of prices in the market is pretty compressed. And it's kind of like compressed down where they're not able to charge what they need to be charging in order to meet the cost of care. It really is truncated and compressed. In contrast to Region 4 and Region 6, where you have a wide range. But in that wide range, still, the 25th and 50th percentile are really quite low and far away from what it costs to run these programs. So basically, you have overall economies in Region 4 and Region 6 that allow you to have a lot more parents who have the resources to be able to pay what it actually costs to provide care, and other parts where you have way fewer parents who are able to meet that. And so that drives the market, and again, drives this whole issue why rates are not going to be what's going to get you where you need to go, that it's only a part of the solution that you have to making a well-functioning child care market that is well supported. So, in regions 1, 2, and 5, again, this issue of it is really hard to operate there. And I don't know the states like where you have child care desert time like that. Just from 30 years of experience, I wouldn't be surprised if those are places where it's pretty hard to find child care, because it's pretty hard to operate with parents not being able to pay the prices it costs. We have similar for the family child care laid out. It's a lot less variation that we're seeing, but still you see in Region 4 and Region 6 more variation in what folks are able to charge. It doesn't line up quite the same, because obviously we're lumping infants and toddlers together and preschool and school age together, because the rates are broken out that way, under 2 and over 2 in the family child care. So it operates a little bit differently. All of these are places where we can dig in more and understand more about what is happening with the cost of providing this care. What does that look like across the whole center when you start balancing out? Maybe you do make some profit on the school agers and the preschools. That's not a bad thing, because it balances out the infant and toddler. But let's make sure that we're paying attention to that if we start providing other services like school-based preschool for folks that are pulling those out of the market. All of that matters for how we think about the financing strategy. Which leads it all to that subsidy rates are only one part. I'm on slide 37 now. You can't fix the market failure that we have in childcare just by raising the subsidy rates. That I think is the overall message that these two studies together, the cost analysis and the market rate, lead you to. You're just increasing the subsidy rates aren't going to be enough to generate the revenue you need to raise salaries in the field, because you can see there are parts of the state in particular and many parts of the market that cannot raise their rates. They would have raised them already if they could, right? And that's what you can see in Boston, where people could, they did. So where do we go from here? Next steps, and this is slide 38, a deeper cost study. So reviewing these current cost drivers in greater detail and thinking about what we think the model needs to be for adequate compensation. What would these budgets look like if we were paying the wages that we need to pay to attract and retain the workforce that we need to be able to build the field? And then exploring new funding strategies. What ways besides per child per day rates can we bring resources to the field and provide stable funding so that they're able to meet the needs of kids and families.
Can I ask a question about this?
Absolutely.
Okay, so equity is about bringing the resources to those who need it, the most resources to those who need it most, right?
Yes.
And so with this research, when we, like, how is equity taken into, and then there's a difference between what is sort of on paper or what is said versus what would be the optimal model? So, like, how far do you go in thinking about this from like an equity perspective? Like, what would a child care center need to fully, sort of maximize what a child deserves?
Yeah. So we will be talking about how to plan all of that out. I think it's an excellent question of where do we want to dig in and study a little deeper on the cost structures. What I will tell you is a little bit about what we've done in Illinois, which is that we've actually costed out multiple different models. So we have like a really comprehensive, high-quality model that is kind of like Head Start or our state's Preschool for All. It's very high standards and comprehensive services. That not every kid probably needs, or every family. Like that would be for your low-income kids, for kids with disabilities, things like that. And then also costing out just more plain run-of-the-mill good child care that doesn't perhaps have all of those extra comprehensive services. So I think that when you talk about how do you inject equity into it and really think about that, it isn't a one price fits all or one cost fits all. There are needs that families has, and we can build that as well as options into the engine.
The SBI is kind of an example of a way to build some, be able to adjust the algorithm on the basis of community demographics.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a good concrete example.
So can I just make a comment? Number one, your next steps, I love the model for adequate compensation piece of this, just because, again, I think Maura mentioned earlier, as different public school systems get into expanded preschool and pre-K, I think they'll start to dictate kind of the market rate for jobs, right? And so how do you start to align with that thinking as we look forward? I know in Springfield in particular, they have expanded this year. So what is that doing to the marketplace and the compensation rates regionally as that's starting to take effect? The second thing, just to follow up on the Secretary's comment, in my day job as a funder, I can tell you a lot of these organizations come to us to help fill that gap, right? And so, and that's, I think, the philosophical question is that what we really want them doing? Or is there a way to better structure the system so that we're reducing the administrative cost of having to build up teams to go fundraise for that gap, which is, so again, philosophical, but, I just think an important distinction that I think a lot of these organizations are doing. So.
Yeah, the unsustainable business model is
dictating an expansion of the administrative costs to help fundraise for the,
And it creates a cycle, which is that, what would we like to use philanthropy for? Innovation, new ways of working and thinking, and instead we're, plugging monthly budget gaps, right, in some cases.
Can I answer one more question? Do you have a perspective on, so the three different dimensions of looking at this, the third one being the percent of providers at 60%, whether that is good, like sort of maybe relative to other states, or how we might think about that? You said like it's good when a lot, I think was the term you used, right? So we'd love your expert opinion on what that should be.
You may have more experience in this than me, let's see.
I don't know that I do. I mean, we know that the number of children who are eligible for childcare don't nearly, I think the national average is less than 35% of eligible families actually access a subsidy. So that's more on the family side in terms of affordability, access, deserts, et cetera. In terms of the number of providers, I think, it's a market issue, right? Like it depends on the population they serve. And so there are plenty of providers in urban areas that if they can fill their program with 100% subsidy, like I know we did focus groups during the pandemic, and many providers in parts of the state said that the stability that we have is because we are 100% subsidy, right? So it really depends on the geography and the population you serve in terms of where you put your program. So I don't know where 60%, let's say, if 60% of providers.
You'd have to know the average, all the income
I
information.
don't, but it's because
because
everybody has been so focused on this percentile on the market rate that that's all that anybody seems to focus on. Illinois is not that different from Massachusetts in its number. We're in somewhere in the 55 to 60% range.
Right. It also, if you do comparisons between state by state, you want to look at, well, what is the subsidy eligible population in that state? Because what you don't want to do is kind of create an oversaturation of childcare providers who are kind of, for lack of a better term, fighting for the same kid. That would be a great place to be. We're not there. But I also think, it's a relative issue based on the demographics of your state so much.
And what's behind my question to you is just as we're now at the engine to model choices and trade-offs, like developing a philosophical point of view or a goal relative to our unique context of eligible, who's eligible and provider base, because this is a supply and demand complicated combination. So
yes.
Well, we want to put that, and we want to, we want to help more families access this, who are eligible to access the subsidies. We want them to have places to go. Right.
I just want to amplify, because I know we just said it kind of quickly, but it would be great to see, using an SVI lens over this work, just so that we're, to model again what people's experience has been with C3 and the benefits of that. So.
Right, because even Metro Boston, on average, yes, but there are two stories to tell in Metro Boston. We should, the averages are a good start, but they're not as good for policymaking as a more differentiated lens.
It's a great segue to our
Yes.
to our panel.
Thank you so much. So to be continued, really appreciate your work and your care.
Great questions. And we can also make the researchers and the EDC research team available to board members if there's things you want to think about with us on this next piece of the process.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And this next section relies on no technology. And all of our presenters are here. So want to invite our panelists to come up and join us.
Yeah, just for the board's sake, in the interest of time, we're going to defer some of the C3. It'll be embedded in this conversation generally, and we have the data in the deck, but want to make sure we spend the right amount of time with our fabulous partners who took time out of their very busy day to come and talk with us. And do you want to say anything before we get started? Oh, I was mentioning Jessica.
She just ran to the ladies.
Okay, great. Good.
We'll take a quick
or left.
Right.
Not take a moment. So as the chair said, we had intended to present a little bit on C3. It really is our natural learning agenda, including the work we're going to do for the next round for the market rate. We're going to be doing a survey of our C3 providers again this fall. And those two sets of information, I think, give us a much broader set of information about what we're talking about. What is the role of rates, and what is the role of other financing that can support greater stability and access for families? We will come back in October and talk a little bit about sort of the learning agenda for C3 and how we connect that back to thinking about its role versus the rates in the system. The other thing I'll mention, just while we're waiting for Jessica too, is that we as part of the FY23 budget, we do have $60 million in a reserve to increase rates. And we intended to bring this market rate survey for all of you to think about sort of where within the existing imperfect structure of our rates right now, we do have an opportunity to at least adjust those rates. And you will have an opportunity to think with us next month about some of the options for how we apply those funds. So the idea was to come here to hear from our providers about what's happening in the field, and then to think about how to apply some of those funds in the context of our overall financing strategy too. So there'll be a vote that is also required, a board vote on how we distribute the big funds.
So maybe what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and start introductions and hear about where you are, and Jessica will join us. So thank you and welcome. Why don't we start with Kathleen? Just talk a little about yourself, where you're situated, your role, and your years in operation, and maybe your relationship to EEC, which I know differs across the panel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm Kathleen Farrell. I own 3 small early education programs in Medfield, Massachusetts, privately owned. I bought an existing program that my children belong to. Actually, after I had finished up some grant work I was doing for OCCS back in the day. And I bought the program, and the woman was selling it because it was when EEC and OCCS were merging. And so she sold it, I purchased it, and that was in 2005. And I opened a second program within the community in 2016, and then my third program in 2019. I'm licensed for a total of 106 children. I have currently I have 24 full-time staff. I overstaff. I have 3 or 4 teachers for every classroom, all EEC. And licensed, and then I have afternoon assistants. So I'm big on high ratios, and that's incredibly important to growing children and supporting children and families, but also supporting teachers and helping them to be the best that they can be. So, yeah.
Thank you. Jessica, welcome. We're just doing a round of introductions, sort of your
Sorry, I've had 2 coffees already.
No.
I needed to listen to the data, but also go to the bathroom, so I apologize. And then I was ringing, I'm like, I hope it's not.
You're good.
So
tell us a little about your role and who you serve and your interactions with the agency.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Jessica G. Acevedo. I am a first-generation Dominican American. I am the proud owner of Little Stars Bars Daycare in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Secretary. I actually will start there. I have had the opportunity to talk to the previous commissioner as well as the existing commissioner as well as the secretary on a one-on-one conversation about how to improve family child care program, which has been a great opportunity to advocate. Aside from being an advocate, I am a student myself. I'm a PhD student at UMass Boston. I'm focused on early education, care policy, and research. I'm really focused on policy and reforming policy and how we can create budgeting forms that really do create avenues for opportunities for individuals like myself to be here today. So I have also notes. So we have actually been in operation since 2013. We hit our 2016. We hit our 6 years this year. Our capacity is 10. We have 4 teachers. All of our teachers are bilingual. We are a Spanish immersion program. So during circle time and throughout the day, our students are listening or hearing conversations, authentic conversations in Spanish or Haitian Creole. We have a large population of Spanish students across the Commonwealth, so we want to make sure we serve those students in the most appropriate manner. And then we provide part-time and full-time services for parents. We're seeing a lot of hybrid parent model work schedules. So some parents are looking for 2 to 3 days rather than 5 schedules. So over there, I was a little upset that you were kind of talking about the high cost of family child care, because that's where the gaps come in, is when parents are only looking for 2 days. So then we have to find other children to fill in the days. And I've been able to create positive partnerships with EEC, which I want more providers to be able to do. And have the opportunity to advocate and tell you where all these costs are coming from and how we can work together. And I have more, but I'll stop.
Dawn, welcome.
Thank you. I didn't want to follow Jessica. That was a really big presentation.
Really, just came from the bathroom.
Fresh. Well done. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you to the board. I am Dawn DeStefano. I am the CEO at Square One in Springfield, Mass. I'm still fairly new. I'm going to ride that new train for as long as I can. Joan Kagan, my mentor, retired a year and a half ago, so nothing like assuming a leadership position in the middle of a pandemic. But we're doing okay. Square One's been in business for almost 140 years. We started in 1883, watching children so that women could go to work. It was the Industrial Revolution. So some women stayed back, did laundry, started a laundry business, and started childcare so that the other women in their community could go to work. So I just find that history brilliant and so applicable to today in 2022. What do I have? I'm licensed for about 500 children. All 500 of my children are subsidized. The city of Springfield and the greater Springfield area is a very poor region. I could go into detail, but I think you all know that. But we're full of pride, and we know that our students in Springfield, notably at Square One, have gifts that the world needs to have. And so we take pride in growing those future leaders at Square One. That comes at a cost, though. I deficit about $500,000 every year. That is the law. That is the difference between what I am reimbursed. That includes the add-on rate, since 30% of my children are in DCF care or in homeless shelters. So I have a high number of children with high needs. And so even with the add-on rate, I have to fundraise for $500,000. To put that in perspective, the average fundraising success story, even for a large nonprofit in Springfield, is $250,000 a year. So the fact that I am able to raise, and I say I, it's not really I, but I am the grant writer at Square One. I do that on my weekends. That's what I do. I work 80 hours a week, and part of that is because I can't afford a grant writer. So when we talk about administrative costs, that's how that works. Because I'm dedicated, and I've dedicated my life to the children that we serve in Springfield. So I've got about 8 preschool classrooms, I have 8 preschool classrooms. 6 years ago when I joined Square One, and we were about to go out of business, the most notable decision Joan Kagan did was say, Dawn, what's your great idea? I'll do whatever you think. And I was brand new. I said, I think you need to move your infants and toddlers out of your centers. I know nothing about that business model, but you're losing a lot of money there. So we closed all of our infant and toddler seats in our centers and moved them all out to family child care. What did that do? We actually gained 10 new family child care providers in the area who said, we'd love to take your infants and toddlers, we'll join your system. Our family child care system is profitable. It helps balance the deficit that I have in center-based care. So I think we really do need to dig into what a community needs, and how do we balance that with family child care. I also have 5 school-age classrooms. During the pandemic, those became critical to our community. We opened all 5. We had over 100 school-age kids with us for 10 hours a day doing their remote schooling. So I pride myself on partnering with our Springfield Public Schools, but I also find myself frustrated, sometimes Paul's the recipient of that frustration, when decisions are made in a vacuum that impact those of us in the community. So I'd love to also at some point, probably not today, but add that. So that's who we are. I also, last note, we also pride ourselves on being creative and innovative. It's usually at Sunday around 7 o'clock when there's just enough gas in the tank to think about what could we do different on Monday. So we'd love to partner with everyone.
Dawn, you mentioned you're licensed for 500.
Yes.
How is your enrollment and your staff capacity?
Our enrollment, thank you for asking. So our enrollment pre-pandemic was 98%. We were always full. Post-pandemic, we are at a 70 to 73%, but that's because we don't have staff to open those classrooms fully. And I will, at the risk of, Teresa, you're so smart. but I'm going to make one correction. We actually, to the Secretary's point, we actually exceed regulatory expectations. And we do that by fundraising. I have 4 teachers on average in every classroom. And every classroom that I have one center with 200 children in it, they all have behavioral challenges. They all have histories of trauma. So I have 4 teachers. I have mental health therapists. I have 2 of them at that center. I have OT, PT, and speech. How do I do that? I fundraise. So I think those are the types of things. If I'm fully staffed, I would be back at my 90% enrollment. So thank you, guys.
Thanks, Dawn. Sharon, great to see you.
Nice to see you. Nice to be here. I'm Sharon McDonald. I am the brand new executive director at the Guild of St. Agnes. I started in July 1st after our executive director retired after 27 years. But I have, thank you, but I have been with the agency. I'm finishing my 23rd year at the Guild of St. Agnes. Not quite as old as Square One, but we were started in 1913, also by women from the Catholic Church who were looking to help women learn skills, domestic skills, but they had children, and so they started the Guild to take care of the children. And we're now a private nonprofit. We currently serve about 1,700 children in Worcester County. We have, starting from birth through 12, in 11 child care centers, 7 of which are early childhood and 5 are school age, and we're in 6 Worcester public schools. We also have about 135 contracted family child care providers who take care of 550 to 600 children. We, like Dawn, also gave up our infant program. We do have toddlers, but we gave up our infant program in most of our centers and expanded them into the family child care when the rate didn't really cover. There is an amazing economy of scale with the program this size, but even with the economy of scale, we couldn't make the infants work. We have 700 DCF contracted slots. Well, we have 400 slots. We have 700 children in DCF and another 20 or so homeless children. So like Dawn, we overstaff. We have at least 3 qualified adults in the classrooms at all times. We also have about 400 income-eligible slots, but we have 530 income-eligible children at the moment, and we take another 300 vouchers, mostly DTA vouchers. We have 47 vehicles. We started transporting children in 1924, and so we've been doing it ever since. The rate increase for transportation was fabulous. Unfortunately, gas has doubled since that rate increase, but it's helping. And we serve breakfast, lunch, and a snack every day, all out of our central kitchen in Granite Street to all the children at no additional cost. We are back to our numbers, pre-COVID numbers, but about 150 of them are increase in family child care as opposed to the centers. Interestingly low, our staff numbers, our number of hours that our staff works is the same as it is at pre-COVID, which says to me that we have more staff because and we have less kids. The needs of the children post-COVID are just like nothing I've ever seen. And so in order, as Catherine said, to support the teachers in the classrooms, we really need to have more staff to be able to not just support the children, but to be able to keep the teachers.
And just to piggyback so that we hear from you as well, Sharon, can you talk a little about how you make your numbers work? Just we heard from
Yeah, so again, definitely economies of scale, because, for instance, we have 400 school-age children. Most school-age workers are part-time. It's very hard to hire part-time. So we allow those teachers to have full-time work, and we have preschool classrooms that they can be put in during the morning. So that expands our growth. We've worked with Project Flourish. We've been in all 3 of the cohorts, which has been a fabulous, fabulous piece that we can bring in folks that have no experience at all except the love for kids, and we know that they'll get a position. The fact that we're larger, when I took over this position, I promoted 3 of my center directors into program staff to supervising, so folks see that there's a place to grow. And, you know, the reality is you do make more money in school age than you do in infant toddler. You know, some of our programs are small, we're paying very little rent, and so we're making some money that offsets. Family child care, the fact that we have 135, 600 kids, there is an add-on rate to the family child care. So that economy of scale really makes it work.
And do you have a fundraising, where does the fundraising fit?
We do not fundraise any operational money except for some behavioral health extras. But the fact that we have 700 DCF children, with the add-on to that helps.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah. And we also have some folks that are working with family child care that are retired DCF and LICSWs. So they're also really helpful in working with the families of our supportive kids. So there's a lot of double duties.
Right. Yep, great. Well, so just for all of you, this board is effectively in conversation, as you heard today, but in previous months as well, really about cost and financing and workforce, not surprisingly. If we weren't in that conversation, we would not be a very good board at this very moment, especially. So Kathleen, you and Jessica have a very different context in some respects than John and Sharon. Just would love to hear a little more about financing on your side and how you make it work and what might be worth surfacing for this conversation today.
Well, for beginning years and for my programs, truly it is, I've had staff for a long time. Several of my staff have been there. One teacher has been with the school. She came with me when I bought it for 26 years. A couple of others have been there 17, 10, 15 years. So I have long-term staff, which is great, but that's also a negative because of the cost factor in that. And so, balancing it out and trying to keep all the balls in the air, logistically, if I don't have money to make ends meet, then I don't take a paycheck. So that's the reality of our day-to-day life. And being a small business and, as an early educator, I'm an educator first before I'm a businesswoman. And taking care of children and families is what I do, and taking care of my teachers is what I do. And growing teachers is incredibly important, and promoting teachers into other roles. And as I've opened new programs and promoting from within and growing people, to exceed their goals. So it's a juggle, It's truly a juggle. And what do we take away? I won't take things away from the children or from the teachers. The children need the equipment, they need the materials. A teacher wants X, Y, and Z for her project that's really important to her. We're going to make that happen. So that's the reality, unfortunately.
And sorry, if you could just talk a little bit about, I know like everybody else, you've struggled with teacher turnover, maybe even some of your long-term staff, and some of the things you've tried to put together to keep people in the program and keep it together.
Yeah, so it's been, this past year, prior to any other year, I've lost 11 teachers, 11. And that most of them were fairly new within the past few years, but I can tell you people leaving the field, people nannying, going to nannying because you can make $30 an hour. I actually lost a teacher, 17-year teacher, a couple weeks ago, nannying. And totally blindsided by that. But over the past, year and a half, really trying to give to teachers, adding benefits, long-term, short-term life insurance policies, for all full-time staff, re-upping the simple IRA, doing that, paying more to health insurance, even though health insurance went up 70%, like craziness. Trying to bring in, doing like I did Welcome Back to School. I gave bonuses to staff and little goodie bags with new things for, a gift certificate for lunch and,
hand sanitizer and, all this stuff in there for them. And so trying to do that regularly, doing lunches, doing teacher appreciation things, doing thank you for doing this. And really, every single day, I am there open to close every day. And every teacher that walks out of that building, I say, thank you so much. Have a great day. I appreciate you. Remember, I appreciate you.
And for your staff, the children themselves?
I have about 10% of my staff have children, and their children go for free.
Yeah. Well, we have a chief people officer at the table too, so that I feel Jamila sparking up with all your fabulous talent and recruitment and retention strategies. It's great.
It's hard.
I know it is the hard part.
It's really hard,
and
again, losing a teacher that's been there for as long as she's been there, that's like a stab in the heart.
It's tough.
It's really tough. And how do you rebuild that team? And I had another teacher, the 25-year teacher who's been there, lost her mind with me last week because I needed to move a teacher, and I never move staff. I don't work that way. You belong to toddlers, you're in toddlers. But I was desperate, and I needed somebody to go to toddlers, and I said, I need to, and she was just like, you're destroying staff, and she got so angry with me, and I was just like, and again, stab in the heart, I'm not destroying staff, I'm trying to keep us alive. I'm really trying to keep us alive. But that's
you're trying to run an organization, and then you're trying to support educators and families, and sometimes the two sort of bump up against each other in a lot of ways, no question.
Right, and especially now, I think stress levels, as I'm sure all of us can agree, stress levels of staff and keeping them all on board.
Tolerance for change and stress.
Yeah, that was hard. So.
Jessica, do you want to jump in on how you sort of make it work for everybody?
So I made a huge connection when you mentioned that whenever there's a gap, it comes out of your pocket or if you don't get paid. That has been consistent in the 6 years of running a family child care program. Anytime a child transitions to preschool, or a family buys a new home, or they just move down the block, so it's no longer in ratio of the distance that they need. I don't get paid. My staff doesn't get paid. And after COVID-19, we did have to go on unemployment. So I actually have taken the business route, and I have used all of our C3 funding to go directly into payroll. I want to make sure that our teachers show up and are okay at home, that they're able to pay their bills, that they're not just living paycheck to paycheck, that they're happy with the work that they're doing. Because of COVID-19, I have chosen to use all of our grant funding for the use of payroll because of the high teacher retention that we need in this field. We need members who want to be with children, who want to learn and continue to grow and aspire to be teachers. We're no longer, a profession that women aspire to anymore. With the agency's help and from private funding that I have been able to raise myself, so I'm the great grant writer over here. I might phone a friend. We have used these costs to then focus whatever profits that we do make to use for CPA, a lawyer, a bookkeeper, our cleaning team. I can no longer clean after 5 because I'm in school, and I want to continue to go to school. C3 has enabled our program to be supported by the agency and the state in an equitable way. The payments have been directly used for payroll. Again, let me mention that again. Using for teacher retention. It can ensure that we can pay our bills, that the teachers' paychecks aren't coming out of my pay. We understand how our Little Star educators, how important they are to children's brain development and successful social skills, which is especially important for our youngest citizens. Period. That's all I have. I don't know if anyone has questions.
No, it's great. I'm going to turn it over to colleagues for a round of questions as they'd like. Paul, then Nikki. Nikki, am I reading you right? Yes.
So first, thank you all for your leadership, your passion, your commitment to do what you do every single day. You're validating stories that I think we all hear anecdotally and real throughout the Commonwealth, and so thank you for sharing that perspective. It's not lost on me that you've come here today, and so my question is actually back at you all to say, as you're preparing for this, you're talking to colleagues or friends about coming in today, I started off the comments from the retreat saying like there is an opportunity here in a moment. So I would really love to hear from each of you on what's the one or two things you want us to take away from your time here today as we think about this. So moving again to the opportunity and the solutions about ways that we can start to take all these learnings forward. And so I'd love to hear from each of you if you have some thoughts on that.
Can we give two?
You can get to
Because I have two thoughts right now.
I'm going to guess, Dawn, you might have 10 or 12.
I was just gonna say,
Your
you're
top
really
two.
good.
Yeah.
I did scribble quite a few, but I'll grab my top two. Kathleen, you really inspire me when you say you're an educator first. I'm a traditionally trained teacher, but I've been raised for 30 years in this nonprofit business, that it's a tax status. It's not a way to do business. And I subscribe to that. And so if I stay in business, people stay employed and they get to care for their families. So, but you bring me back to the whole purpose that I'm even in the business of doing this. So thank you for sharing that. I think we've got to do things different. And at square one, to me, things through the pandemic especially have just appeared dire, and my tagline at my senior management meeting is, when things are bad, there's lots of opportunity to make it better. So let's grasp the opportunity. And we had employers calling us. Our largest employer in Western Mass, Bay State Health, called and said, help us. We need floors cleaned. We need food delivered. Our entry-level folks are stuck at home. What can we do? And I said, well, if you're willing to support Square One financially, it's so horrible, then I'm happy to meet with you and talk about some creative ways. And so Bay State and Square One entered into a backup care arrangement because I had so many children that were so frequently absent. And thank you to EEC for paying me while they were absent. But I saw an opportunity to earn more revenue and sell that seat to someone who could come in. And so Bay State employees, their lowest earning employees, now utilize Square One as their backup care. Bay State has set a threshold for their reimbursement in support of their lowest paid employees. So it's a true partnership where Bay State says, we want to open backup care to our highest earning folks, but for our lowest earning folks, how can we also help them? Because we charge them our private fee, which by the way is always only 5% more than the rate we're getting. So we get the lowest rate in the state and then our private fee is 5% more. So I'm really not even making that much money in my private fee. So I offer that idea that there are employer partners who need our service as a business. Forget the education that happens, just the care. And so how can we do that and have those conversations and replicate things that are working? The other thing is, I've started thinking, and I know the whole per child per day has just been said over and over again, but when we think about mental health services at Square One, we traditionally have partnered with our service partners in the city to do that one-on-one outpatient therapy care, where we have a therapist who comes in for that child. Sort of the same per child, per hour reimbursement through insurance. And so we met with the Lego Foundation and said, are you willing to do a pilot program where we have therapists who serve all our children? It's no longer about Paul or Amy or Tony. It's about our community. And so how do we just, in healing one, heal all? And that has been miraculous. I will brag, in 3 years, we have not terminated a child for behavior. 3 years. But that's because we had a private funder who came in and said, I don't care how many kids, you can serve one child for this amount of money. Take the money, develop your therapeutic center, and serve whoever you need to serve. In doing so, we're also serving the teachers. So it's a community again, by serving children with their teachers versus pulling a child, doing the service, returning a child, and the teacher has no idea what just happened. the teacher actually goes with the child. So that's why we're funding 4 teachers per room, because when we take a peer group of kids into our therapeutic center, we take a teacher with them. That way, whatever is accomplished in that session, all that learning goes back to the classroom. So I think there are just ways of doing business. Certainly, we need to be paid for individual children at individual times. But for communities such as Springfield, when there is such a saturation of need, stop counting kids. Just stop. Can we look at us as a community and do things a little different?
Great.
How's that for an idea?
Thank you.
Long-winded idea.
We have been talking at this table for a couple of years, like sort of adjust, kind of orienting the lens even of the agency to like units and settings rather than slots for kids, right? Is sort of how we've been talking about it. Other ideas to put in the hopper, Kathleen, Jessica, Sharon.
So my couple of ideas that I have is, when the pandemic first happened, I felt like there was this really large, ball rolling about raising the bar for early educators and really embracing our role and what we do in our community and in the Commonwealth, and that's really tanked. And I think that we really need to bring the forefront to what we do and the importance of the role of early childhood educators on children, on teachers, and on our economy and the working parents that we're serving every single day. And that hasn't happened. And the reality of what we're doing and how we're supporting children. I mean, yes, we take care of the children, but we're also supporting the parent who's tired, dropping her child off and crying in the lobby as she's dropping in, am I a bad parent? And she needs a hug. That woman needs a hug to go off to work every day. And so we're doing so much, and there's so many pieces surrounding that, or they have a child that needs therapy, and how do I get them connected, and how can they help, because they're working parents, and the pressures on them are really hard too. And so we really need to bring light on the forefront of what early childhood educators do every single day for the big picture, not just the little picture.
Right.
So that's my one. And then my other is really giving teachers a living wage and really looking at what they deserve along with that respect of being that. And those are my 2 pieces.
Yeah, no question.
Thank you for letting me share.
Absolutely.
Related to that, this isn't my idea, but I'm going to add on to it. We were at a MAPCA, I am the treasurer of MAPCA, and there was one of the members there who said, that campaign, be all that you could be in the Army. Like, we need to do it, be all that you can be. We need a statewide EEC. You need to be an early educator, and we need you, And, like, there's some, you folks would have the money to be able to put something out statewide, right? And then we can take them and put them in Project Flourish or put them in another program and say, that we need you. You can make a difference with us,
Sharon, I'll just add, the Commissioner and I and others have talked about that as we think about how to do what you're saying, Kathleen, which is reinforce the importance of this field on the whole economy.
Yes.
Yes, it's early education, yes, it's care, but there's an economic message that comes with it, an economic mobility message as well. And so we're aligned on that about ways to kind of reframe that.
And teachers thought that people got it. Early educators thought people got it. They finally understand how important we are to the economy. And now they're like, but what happened? The economy's going back, and we're back to being in the basement again. I mean, that's the experience of teachers, which is really, really hard. So, I mean, unlike you, we are not spending C3 money on salaries. I am very worried about the cliff effect. I know that the legislatures are worried about it. They put it in their language of the budget that EEC is responsible for making sure that we're ready when this cliff falls. If we fall off the cliff, if we don't, fabulous. But we need sustained money to be able to keep the salaries that they are. I'm really proud we pay $50,000 to lead teachers with bachelor degrees, plus we give a 10% 401k bonus. match of 4%, our lead teachers with bachelor degrees are staying. They're not going to be, they're invested in our place. I'm also really worried about the hundreds of thousands of kids that are looking for childcare, subsidized care. I'm worried that when I started the Guild of St. Agnes, we were at about a 50-50 mix of subsidized and private kids. When my son went to the Guild of St. Agnes 14 years ago, he was one of like 20% that were full fee. We can't have a system that's for the free kids and the paying kids. We need to be able to subsidize kids so that all of us take subsidized kids, so that our kids are together, all of us have services. And I'm really, really concerned that our mixed system of subsidized and for-profit is getting greater and greater, and that doesn't help anyone.
Yeah.
Jessica, did you want to jump in on this part?
Sure. I actually want us to think about why we're all here today. I asked each of us to think about our why and our common mission to improve the future of our society. I became the owner of a child care program in my 20s with a personal loan for our first and last month's rent and a business plan. Through funding family child care programs, EEC can directly support thousands of women of color, their families, and the children and families within the community they serve. Based on my research and professional experiences in the field of early education and care, I believe it's time for us to make a change now. Not tomorrow, not next month, not when the budget is depleted. The largest cost for me as a small business owner has been childcare space. Being in a rental contract means that the landlords are unjustly making decisions about operation, occupancy, and costs. These costs, which then are placed on working parents and families. Family child care programs are majority for profit, and based on the data and market trends, we see why. Because there's a huge gap of what they should be charging, which equates to salaries. So why would we take less money if we already can't pay our teachers and ourselves? And I quote from the department website, "The Department of Early Education and Care's mission is to support the healthy growth and development of all children by providing high-quality programs and resources for families and communities. To accomplish this mission and vision requires an investment in women-run, specifically family child care programs." And I'm so inspired of all the work that you guys have made more connections with family child care programs. I'd love to talk to you guys later. Family child care programs are the root of building skilled citizens and strong leaders, like yourselves. I am here today to advocate for family child care programs and equitable funding streams that promote, and these are my points, entrepreneurship, because it is a business. Family stability, because if our families aren't okay, we can't show up to work. And generational wealth. I am a product of a previous family child care program provider who worked 20 years and then retired, and I took over her business. I am one success story of thousands that we don't know about. We don't know these women, we don't know their stories, we don't know the work that they do and the families that they serve. We are not doing our due diligence as a Commonwealth if we don't actually know the work that our workforce is doing. We are the leaders making these decisions without actually asking the people doing the work. That's a problem.
Nikki, you had a question.
I did, and Jessica, thank you so much. And my question is actually for you, and I apologize for any confusion. I was actually asking why I feel like we're underestimating how much it costs to provide family child care. The costs for group care look like about double what they are for family child care. And so I was actually wondering if you would mind, I actually send my children to family child care, but I'm a very big believer in family child care.
You're a supporter?
Big supporter. And I see my family child care provider, I think she probably works at least 12 to 14 hours every single day. And that's between cooking and cleaning and caring for the children, because she does everything.
Absolutely.
And she does the business. And, yeah. And so I was just wondering if you could talk about the hours that you spend and how maybe the costs might not, it may be hard for us to see on paper sort of what the costs are to you, right? But sort of, can you paint a broader picture for us as a family child care provider,
Well, I think
what those look like?
this is a great platform to actually discuss that. What I've been seeing is that there hasn't been any changes in family child care salary. A lot of these women have been in the field for 10, 15, 20 years and still are getting paid $20,000. Running a business, operating. And just because it's in a home does not mean that it's less work or less obligation or responsibility. People work from home from their computers and get full salaries. And benefits, and pensions. Every time a child walks into my child care space, it's a liability. If something happens, that's my family's liability. That's possible, repercussions, even bad feedback, which on Google could really deter families from even questioning if they want to join our space. So I think to answer your question is that the hours that I have dedicated to this work cannot be calculated into dollars, because I'm not here for the dollars, I'm here for the improvement of our society and for children. So when I am asking for budgeting and for strategic plans, it's so I can keep my space open, not so I can profit. If I could profit off of this business, I'd be not here. I'd be on a beach, to be honest. With all of you guys also. You guys can come to my beach. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. Other questions for the panel? It's a great discussion.
Just maybe one. I think, I'm trying to remember who may have raised this issue before about, and maybe Donna was you, around the relationship with the public school system. And Springfield's a CPBI community, and was what was the name of the federal grant program before then? PEG grant, thank you. Jeez, okay.
Yeah.
COVID brain.
But I think the ethos behind both of those is to create more community responsibility, shared responsibility for children, for the youngest children, families who are certainly under 5 and beyond. And I guess I'm wondering, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but whether the work that's been done to try to build bridges across the sectors has been, whether it's still, those bridges are still in place. We obviously were talking about Springfield expanding their preschool programs for more children, which is a wonderful thing, but it does put tension and pressure in those relationships. I wonder if you could give us some insight, and this is for everyone, just how do we make progress on making this more of a community responsibility rather than these siloed sectors that are in some ways are in competition or in tension with one another?
I'm in no short of opinions, and I don't mind thinking on my feet. I don't know how I got this job. So at the risk of doing something offensive but speaking the truth, much as Jessica said, the relationships we established during PEG and CPPI have been fantastic. So the bridge that you referenced, the structure is there, where it wasn't before, from my perspective. So check that off the box. I now have numbers and emails and people that I can reach out to that I couldn't before. I think in my humble, not so humble opinion, part of it is a power dynamic that still exists. So for example, PEG and CPPI, the lead applicants were always the district. And to be perfectly blunt, Springfield almost didn't apply for CPPI because they didn't have the capacity internally to manage the grant. We accomplished that as a community because I stepped up. I'm now giving 5 hours a week, 10 hours a week to be the co-manager of CPPI for our community. Because that was my way of convincing the schools, I'll step up if you step up. And so we're doing that together. So that's good. That means the relationship existed for both of us to want to take the risk to continue doing the work. But the money, the bulk of the money available for early childhood in Springfield rests. Our public school is able to make these decisions to open classrooms because they've got staff ready to go because the staff moved from our community-based program into their preschool classrooms, which frankly, I celebrate. I celebrate. You get a better pension working for the public school department. You know, you're a great teacher. Our children will benefit. So I don't tend to bless and release with any chagrin. I think it's great. I would love, though, I think the bridge would be more stable if our school system could think about collaborating before they make a decision, before it goes public. Ask the question of, be vulnerable enough to say, what is this going to do to you? Maybe the answer is nothing. Maybe this is great. But I think they oftentimes act and then go back to say, ooh, is anybody upset? And I think we can do better than that. I think the relationship is there to be able to do that. And it would kind of smooth out the power dynamic if we both honor each other as the experts that we both are in the work we do. I think we could actually move. But we're better than where we were, if that gives you anything.
Well, and if I could add a little, because Worcester does not have, didn't have the PEG program, and we're grateful, mostly because we do have a good relationship and because the PEG program doesn't do the after-school programming. So we know, they did do preschool programming 20 years ago, and then the parents were left without an after-school program. However, we did apply as a group to do CPPI this past year, a planning grant to do special education services in our child care centers. We've had a fabulous program set up that they would do the testing. The public schools were on board to bring in, if funded, to bring in special educators to our programs. You know, kids aren't going to be on the bus. It was a great idea. We got the planning grant, and then the superintendent left, and we didn't get to apply for the rest of the grant because there was no one to write the grant at the public schools. You know, so we're at a loss. So now we're looking at the city to try to bridge it until then. But there's this, you know, because of the size of a district and the politics around the district, when there's a threat, they constrict. And when they constrict, the community-based providers are left out. You know, just a small, simple thing like we've been trying to get transportation that the public schools will drive past the Girls Inc. program or the YMCA to the bus stop half a block away, but won't drive into the driveway and drop off those 10 kids at Girls Inc. So Girls Inc. has to go and have a staff person meet those kids at the bus. It's a constriction thing, right? And so until we can really figure out that they're all of our kids and we're working together, you know, you can put in whatever in place, but it's just not happening.
The busing is a big one.
It's huge.
Oh my gosh, Sharon, I can't believe you brought it up. I've said it multiple times.
You know, and they're
you drive right by.
Right, but they're, you know, where we're down 95 bus drivers, we can't possibly do it. No, you can't think about doing it because you're threatened, you know, you're worried, how are you going to get these kids home? I get it. I mean, I run an agency too. It's hard. But to be able to have the space to say, can we think a little bit broader to take care of our community's kids? And it's very rare.
This has been the real push from the collective impact movement, right? To do some mapping and figure out ways to create some coordination and efficiencies. But you know, it's a work in progress.
Big nut to crack.
Yeah, it is
really. And as soon as you do, someone leaves, and you start all over again. Whether it be the the council or the school committee or the superintendent or the mayor, you know.
That's the push by the collective impact group, is to say, how do we get past the people and the relationships and get structures in place? No question. Listen, I can't, Jessica, you want to jump in?
I did want to just follow up with your question, Secretary, because it brought to mind teacher retention in the public schools and how the high need of teachers, and are we thinking about how those women men may need childcare in order to go back to work? So it's not just about family childcare programs, it's about education and making sure that, you know, our teachers can get to work and that our children can go to childcare programs that are safe and, you know, mom can be a part of the boards and things of that sort. So, you know, how do we make a full circle work for everybody? Yeah, no question.
That is the question.
That's right.
Actually, asked the question.
The charge is before us. Listen, thanks to each of you. Not obviously, yes, for your very valuable time today, but more so for everything that we've heard about, which is in some ways both inspiring and completely unsustainable. So thank you all for everything that you do every day for children and families. And I know that we certainly, this was very well timed for us to continue to think about the workforce development, the subsidy access and user experience, the way that the state decides on some policy strategies to enrich the entire system and to support leaders as well, like yourselves, who are supporting the educators, but you also need support. So thank you very much for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again. Thank you so much. The board will now meet in executive session to discuss personnel-related matters. So the board has determined that discussing these matters in an open session will have a detrimental effect on this body. So the board will not reconvene after the executive session in an open meeting following that conclusion. So instead, we will adjourn directly from the executive session. So I will now call the roll of the board to convene the executive session. Nikki Ruiz de Luziaga, excuse me.
Yes. Do I say yes or?
Yeah. Morris Eagle. Yes. Paul Belcito. Yes. Carolyn Kane.
Yes.
Secretary Kaiser.
Yes.
Maria Moeller. Yes. Jamila Reed. Yes. Okay. At this point, the meeting is At this point, the meeting is concluded. I excuse all members of the public and thank you very much. We'll see you in Boston in October.